It is Friday, May 26th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another zesty episode of LTPS. We have a lot to go over from this past week because it was very busy. A PlayStation showcase, a Jim Ryan interview with Famitsu. Also, we had the business segment briefings, which had a lot of juicy things in there, like the confirmed PS VR2 sales. Also, the subscriber numbers for PS Plus Extra and Premium. A lot of stuff in there. So, before we get into all that, as always, I'd like to remind you to claim your PS Plus May Essential Games. Get that done. Still got some time left on that, but let's start with the 2023 PlayStation Showcase, because it's been a few days now, right? So we can reflect on what happened, and I guess the one thing we can say right away, or I guess it's always a good reminder to bring this up, right? Between all three platform holders, these things are always going to be primarily third-party games. Third-party indies, they're going to be the bulk of all that. That's always why my gut reaction to a lot of these shows is that, like, oh, it's good because there's a lot of games in there, right? You know, Sony showed off 30-something games. But it's always going to be third-party stuff, right? But the scrutiny does come in with first-party. You know, what is Nintendo going to show off for their upcoming games in a direct? Same for Microsoft with all their recent acquisitions, and it's very true for Sony as well with PlayStation Studios. This was expected to be an event that should have a lot of PS Studio announcements, and to their credit, 4 is a good number. I mean, we're talking about very big, expensive projects that take years, so it's not something where we can always think they're going to fire off 6 or 7, big first-party announcements. That's unrealistic. So 4 does make sense. It's just how they did those 4 is the problem. But what we'll try to do here is, I guess, cover up some additional details on the games that we just, quite frankly, don't really know a whole lot about. So starting with Concord, which is Firewalk's game, a recently acquired studio. So this, we just didn't get anything. It was the worst kind of cinematic trailer where they showed basically nothing, but the follow-up details we got on the PlayStation blog at least gives us a very brief description on what this game is. So Concord is a PvP multiplayer first-person shooter set in a vibrant sci-fi universe coming to PS5 and PC in 2024. Now, this actually was a bit surprising to me because the game's coming next year, and this was the one title that we saw the least of, technically, because this trailer just had nothing in it. Having said that, knowing that it's a first-person shooter and we haven't had a first-party FPS in a long time, I will say that despite us not seeing anything, that piques my interest, right? Just knowing the genre and, sci-fi, like, okay, I like sci-fi stuff, so, we'll sit on that. The other one that we saw is Haven Studios' game, so this was called Fair Games, or Fair Game with the $S. This one, cinematic trailer, but at least we got they showed enough to where you can pick up the general vibe that they're going with on this one, right? So later on the PS blog, they did give a description on this game. So Fair Games is and this is what they say, is a fresh, modern take on the heist genre, a new type of PvP game with emergent sandbox gameplay. The game will give players the opportunity to break the rules as a modern-day Robin Hood, a thrill seeker, or just someone who wants to collect cool loot. Trespass inside forbidden locations around the world, fill your pockets like a kid in a candy store, and unravel the nefarious plans of untouchable billionaires. That is the elevator pitch we got for this game, and that sounds extremely uninteresting to me. Nothing about that is what I would be into, but I will always caution, we just didn't see anything, right? You might not care for the tone and the vibe that they're setting, and that's where this is just totally not my kind of thing. But we just didn't see any gameplay, and gameplay is king. So if they're not going to show anything, I think it's really hard to pass judgment. But first impressions, not looking too good with the tone that they're setting for this one. Now, we did see a lot of Helldivers 2. So this is one of those second-party games from Arrowhead, but we actually got gameplay, so we can say exactly what this game is. It's a third-person sci-fi shooter, and definitely something where we know the game's launching this year on PS5 and PC, and it's a PvE experience. The one thing with Helldivers, though, is that friendly fire is always on, so they do reiterate that in the follow-up post on the PlayStation blog, that they want you to coordinate with your friends, and I believe that was the same thing for the original game. I don't have a whole lot of time on that one, but I remember specifically most rooms that I got into, friendly fire was on, so that's the thing they really want you to, kind of get into, is the sort of pushing that coordination with the people that you're playing with. And I guess we could also mention that the game is likely going to be a paid title, because there is notes on the PS blog that PlayStation Plus is required, so very likely this game is not going to be a free-to-play experience, so just keep that in mind. But I will say, I liked what I saw with Helldivers 2, and I think that's because it's just a lot different from the isometric viewpoint from the first game. I like that, but at the same time, I think I generally gravitate towards third-person shooters, so it looks interesting, and it is coming out this year, so something that I think is worth keeping our eyes on for sure, and we should be finding out more soon, considering they do plan on launching it this year. Now, the other PlayStation Studios game that we saw was Spider-Man 2, and this one very much was headlining the whole showcase, basically, because it was 10 plus minutes of gameplay. Looked fantastic, by the way, but the one thing we did not get was a confirmed release date, and so Insomniac did already get ahead of this on Twitter, where they do confirm they'll release that info soon, along with the pre-order stuff and also accessibility features. I anticipate that's going to be either a separate state of play when it's closer to launching, or it'll just be like something where we wake up and it's on the PlayStation blog, a bunch of details and things like that. But we also learned earlier in the week that Insomniac, again on Twitter, confirmed that Spider-Man 2 is going to be single player only. So somebody did reach out and say, is there going to be co-op or something like that? And this was before the showcase, mind you. So we saw that there was and I think this was kind of expected, but the whole switching between Peter and Miles thing. But no, there's no co-op. It's, purely a PS5 single-player game. And that just means that, okay, this multiplayer project that Insomniac does have, it's certainly going to be a separate thing, and Spider-Man 2 will purely be a single-player experience. Now, the Project Q remote play device, there's not much we can really say here, because a lot of the initial rumors that we heard from Tom, they were all true, as in, it's an 8-inch LCD, up to 1080p, 60 frames. It's, strictly a remote play device with DualSense haptics and triggers, coming out by the end of this year. We don't have a confirmed release date. We don't have pricing details, although I can certainly see this thing being in the $200 neighborhood, because it's still going to be a fairly premium device for at least what it is, and we've seen with Sony's pricing, they skew on the higher end. But, it will have its use cases. My issue with this thing, which we didn't get to really touch on in the reactions video, it just looks so silly. This thing is getting clowned on left and right. It wouldn't be terrible if it didn't straight up look like a DualSense cut in half. That is what Sony's engineers have seemingly done here. It just looks so bizarre. Fill in that blank space around the display. Give this thing some solid surface area. I feel like it's going to easily get nicked or cracked on that corner just based off of some weird way that I haphazardly decide to sit or carry it through the house. Very strange looking. If this is not your thing, as a sort of follow-up news story here, the Backbone 1 is now finally available for the PlayStation Edition for Android, right? So I checked out the iOS one a while back with that week-long remote play experiment that I did, which that was looking back on that, it's still a completely viable way to play games. I see why people do it. It works. Still not the way I would, ever choose to do it. But the problem with playing on the smartphone is that a lot of modern games, their UI elements are just not conducive to a small screen. So realistically, the Project Q would, I assume, be a nice way to play games via remote play with the larger 8-inch screen. And considering it is basically a DualSense cut in half, that means it's going to be comfortable to hold as well. Not sure in terms of overall weight, but at least the controller itself should feel nice. Next up, we have some Final Fantasy XVI news, because of course we do. It seems like no matter what day of the week it is, there's always something going on with this game, whether it's new trailer, gameplay details, live streams, interviews. Square has been non-stop running the press junket for this game. They want you to buy it, and in fairness, we did learn some cool things from this past week, so let's talk about how, for one, this game is not going to have a day one patch, or at least as of right now, that is the current plan. So when speaking with Game Informer, the producer Naoki Yoshida did confirm that the team is feeling very confident in their final build, and also there's apparently no plans for DLC. So again, the producer Naoki Yoshida says, and I quote here, "It's a one-off game. We're asking players to pay the full price for this experience, and we so want an experience that's going to equal the amount of money that players are going to be paying, and we want them to have satisfaction equal to what they paid or even more than that. We have no idea if people are going to fall in love with Valisthea and fall in love with Clive's story and want to see more of the world and more of its characters. So while we always want to consider DLC or spin-offs or those type of things where you can learn more about the game, first we want to see if Valisthea and Clive are really the things players around the world want to see more of, and then make that decision." I would be very surprised if they did not do more with this game, considering at least in recent years, if Square, has some kind of mild success, you're going to see more of that thing that they just did, So they do try and capitalize on these when they, hit them every so often, right? So I would imagine this game is going to do well, and if it does, then we should see some DLC and probably inevitable spin-offs, and Clive then, having cameos in other Final Fantasies and things like that. But beyond that, we can say that, Square did formally confirm the demo is coming. It's going to be a pretty lengthy demo where you can play for a few hours and carry that progress over into the full game. They didn't confirm when that demo is going to release. They just gave a rough timeline of about 2 weeks prior, which some people took that as maybe we'll see it during the PlayStation Showcase. Well, we saw the game at the Showcase, but have the demo drop after the Showcase. That did not happen. I would imagine they're saving that for June 11th when they have that live stream in Los Angeles, so keep that in mind. Now, in other Final Fantasy news, we also got a very candid response from the producer on why the game is exclusive to PlayStation 5, where, again, speaking with Game Informer, he says, and I quote here, "When we do begin development, we do approach multiple platforms, multiple companies about releasing the game, and when you approach them, they're going to come back to us with their offers." So he's basically saying that PlayStation made the best offer. He goes on to say, "That said, from a developer and programmer perspective, limiting development to one system makes it not only easier on us, but allows us the ability to optimize it. And that allows us the ability to maximize performance for that one system because we're only concentrating on that one system." He elaborates further that they had access to Sony's resources, which we heard about a few weeks ago, how Sony's engineers played a key role in aiding the development of this game. So, I mean, it's something where it's always nice to hear somebody this high ranking in the games, in any game's development, where they're able to, just sort of spell it out clearly, like this is what happened. There's conversations that, take place between multiple companies and platform holders, and we field out the offers, and we just, we settle on one that makes sense for us, right? It's not always about, for a lot of studios, it's not always about hitting all platforms day one. In theory, you can focus on one and reap the benefits of that relationship that you've signed on with. And in the case of Sony, it's a lot of things. Obviously, it's an exchange of money, but it's also things that Sony has a lot of leverage and bargaining chips to offer, right? It's things like visibility on the PlayStation Store. It's the internal resources that they have, which, of course, played a big part of this particular deal. Which, and they've got a good relationship with Square as well, right? So these things tend to be very, very natural for this kind of game. So I think really the big question mark is simply much like FF7, which, the expectation always was, okay, it's on PC, now eventually Xbox, and that did not happen, right? So is that the same kind of deal for this game? We won't know until just a lot of time passes, right? Well after the game came out. But seemingly we have just a good example of a producer outlining exactly what happened here. Moving on to our next news story, it was recently confirmed that Ghost of Tsushima has sold 1 million copies in Japan, or rather it's reached that milestone of 1 million copies sold, which is a huge milestone no less, because when you consider all the factors at play of that region just not being big with the traditional console market anymore. It's been, 15 plus years since that was the case. So with those consumers, they gravitate heavily towards mobile and handheld play. That's why Switch does really well, and that's why that's really the only software that tends to not reliably hit, a million plus units, but just they tend to do a lot better and they chart in the top 40. So it's very rare that a console game is going to hit 1 million units in Japan. So that's why it's so impressive to see not only did this game do it, but it's Ghost of Tsushima, where we've seen throughout the past 2-3 years with its release that it's been received very well by Japanese players. Even so much as the game's developers being labeled ambassadors of Tsushima Island. So I think Sucker Punch has to feel really proud about all these milestones they've continuously hit throughout the years with this particular game. And anytime Ghost of Tsushima news comes up, I always think about how good that game is. It almost makes me want to do another playthrough, but I'm just excited for the inevitable sequel that's still probably a decent ways out. Now, while we're talking about Japan, good segue into our next news story, which is a recent Famitsu interview with the president and CEO of SIE, Jim Ryan. And I feel like these come up every 6 months to a year. And I think it's also with Famitsu every time where they're speaking with Jim Ryan. But, the question always comes up of PlayStation's relationship with Japan. Is it still important? This and that, right? And so Jim will always give the same broad answer. And so in this case, it was yes, of course it is, right? So saying that Japan is the birthplace of PlayStation, that, it's a big market for them. And, he also says, and I quote here, SIE has a long history of relationships with developers and publishers. So the Japanese market is extremely important in that sense as well. And I mean, this is how they've always gone about doing it, right? Where it's a lot of partnerships and collaborating and things like that. So it's not like they've completely abandoned Japanese games or Japanese developers. I think that much is obvious, right? But the conversation does always seem to center around more uniquely Japanese games, some of the smaller experiences that they have not necessarily gravitated away from, but Sony's had more restrictive censorship policies that, rub people the wrong way. And there's just, obviously the closure of Japan Studio, but we still have Team Asobi. And, I think moreover, what people tend to overlook, and this is what I'm hopeful for in the future, which is, XDev is now a very global effort. They're hiring XDev positions across a number of countries, right, including Japan. So, we could see more direct PlayStation partnerships under XDev, which would then, by association, presumably make those titles PlayStation Studio games, right, because those can be second-party things. So I think there's a lot of things we can still see from Japan, right, if there is still a yearning and desire for those kind of experiences, right? Those uniquely Japanese style games that I very much enjoy as well. I would like to see more of those. But Sony has appropriately sort of done what they can with this market, where, as we just said, the traditional console space is not what it used to be, right? So they've not completely walked away from it, but something where I think they've sort of grown with it appropriately. Now let's get into Sony's 2023 business segment briefings. They held this right next to the PlayStation Showcase, so a lot of this news I think got kind of lost in all that craziness, but they'll do this every year, and something where all the leadership for the various divisions will run through some slides and talk about their business. So in this case, we're looking at the Games and Network Services division, and this is where we learned some very interesting things. So we'll cover some of the more pertinent and interesting slides, I think. So starting off with, just PS5's overwhelming success. So PS5 is still all around seeing a lot more engagement in nearly all major metrics. So things like PS Plus attachment, life-to-date store transactions, average gameplay time, and monthly active users, they're all higher on PS5 versus PS4 in comparable timeframes. In totality, the average lifetime spend per PS5 console sits at $622 compared to PS4's $479, tracked across accessories, subscription, add-ons, and full game purchases. Sony also spilled the beans on exact numbers for new PlayStation Plus tiers. So as of March 2023, there's 6.1 million subscribed to Extra and 8 million subscribed to Premium. So a total of 14.1 million PS Plus users, or about 30% of the base subscribers, did decide to upgrade to a higher tier. As for PlayStation VR2, after 6 weeks, it's at nearly 600,000 units sold, representing an 8% jump when launch aligned to the original PSVR. So that Bloomberg report that we got, which used estimates from a research firm, they were way off, because by week 6, or week 5 I should say, they were well above 270,000 units. But we can see very clearly on that graph that they used that PSVR 2's sales pace is already starting to level off, where the original PSVR is picking up momentum. But they are doing this right before they opened up PSVR 2 to more retailers. So, you know, right now it's been primarily PlayStation Direct, and it's also a higher price. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think they strategically showed this graph right before it might have looked not that impressive. Now, in terms of IP investment, we see that by fiscal year 25, half of this will be going to new IP, so that's always good to see, and we can even look at fiscal year 23, where it's already at 40%. But this is where Sony gives us that breakdown of their live service roadmap. So as far as I'm aware, there's nothing particularly new here, but we again see that by fiscal year 25, 60% of investment will go to live service titles, 40% traditional. As for PC, they confirmed Spider-Man Remastered sold 1.5 million copies. The Last of Us did 368,000, which that was despite the launch problems, and it seems like that's finally getting better. But they are expecting this area to see tremendous growth as they work on releasing more games out of their back catalog, which, bear in mind the recent Famitsu interview with Jim Ryan, he also confirmed again that for now, PC games will get a staggered release. So about 2-3 years before they, after they launch on console. As for their mobile strategy, it seems this will be a tame effort, so they do claim multiple internal studios are working on mobile games, and they are also exploring mobile investments and acquisitions, also doing code development stuff with external studios. But the next slide shows a breakdown of expected releases on each platform. So based on releases, fiscal year 25 will see this split primarily between new PS5 games and then back catalog PC titles, and then what appears to be a handful of mobile games. So very curious as to what their mobile stuff is going to look like for sure, if they're only going to do a few compared to the higher volume of PS5 and back catalog PC titles. Next, we have some broad commitments here where Sony says they want to have at least 2 or more major releases per year covering every major genre with a mix of single player and live service, balancing existing and new IP. So basically, they want to release a lot of video games. And I think this is all best summed up in the last slide, where it shows number 1, console growth, number 2, portfolio expansion, and number 3, Sony collaboration. Now, during the Q&A portion, nothing really popped up here except one thing that an investor asked about, which was cloud gaming. And so Jim Ryan did say cloud gaming is instrumental in the mobility of their IP, and he said there's nothing to announce right now, but they do have, quote, interesting and quite aggressive plans that will unfold over the course of the coming months. I would assume what he's referring to is finally offering PlayStation 5 streaming, so deploying PS5 server blades, that and maybe also finally expanding into countries that they have never had streaming options for, so this would go all the way back to PS Now, where in the present day it's just PlayStation Plus Deluxe because they can't offer premium because there's no streaming there, right? So Sony is still nowadays kind of, I don't want to say like very out of position in the cloud space, but it is such a new nascent market. I mean, that's the whole crux of the CMA's issue with blocking the ABK deal, is that it is such a small market that has so much more room to grow and have competitors come in and, you know, sort of in theory, they could set the rules and foundations, the terms and conditions for how that marketplace is going to act, and that's why they wanted to block Microsoft's ABK deal to not give them too much leverage in that space. So it's an area that Sony doesn't want to be out of position on. So while it may not seem exciting, they've got to do something to make it more meaningful. I mean, the very fact that it's not a good experience means maybe we should start seeing improvements there. So if I had to guess, I would say they're going to soon announce PlayStation 5 server blades, which then we'll see just how good those really are. But going back to PlayStation Plus, I'm surprised that they did finally confirm subscriber numbers for those higher tiers, which tells me they're probably, they've got to be proud of those, of that attach rate, right? We're talking about 30% of base subscribers upgraded in some way, and we can also see that most of them felt that the price difference wasn't too big, so they went all the way to premium. So there's more premium subscribers than extra. So for what is, a presentation for investors, you want to showboat your success, and that's what they're talking about here. That kind of goes into like the one slide where they again talk, because they did this last year too, where they show PlayStation's brand loyalty and how it tracks higher than, competitor B and C, like, oh, I wonder who that is, right? So, they did that, also showing PSVR2's sales graph right before that trajectory was maybe not going to look so good, so that was good timing on their part to showcase that, although maybe we'll finally see PSVR2 have a nice little booster shot, given that it's now available at retail. But I can see that headset possibly seeing a price cut if it does not really move the needle in a meaningful way. But, given the circumstances that headset launched in, where it was rough economic times, a high price tag, it's a niche market, only available on PlayStation Direct. So given all those conditions, selling nearly 600,000 is quite good, just that it does remain to be seen how well it'll do long term. But speaking more on the entire PlayStation business, we saw when PS5 came out, there was a lot of demand. They couldn't keep up. Now the supply is finally here, and that means they're selling a lot of PS5s. But that's also translating to crazy engagement levels that are higher than PS4. They've got to be hitting every KPI behind the scenes that they're, tracking very closely for this console. And it is something where they value the console business a lot. It's the pillar of their growth, right? I mean, it's making sure PlayStation 5 stays successful, and then branching off from there with all these different things, right? PC, mobile, obviously when it comes to games, expanding into live service, something that they historically have very little presence in. That's why they're chasing it. So I know there's a lot of concern with the whole 60-40 thing for their investment level. I'm not as concerned about this, if only because I know the company is not dumb, and they're not going to walk away from single-player games. They're just not. I mean, they say this how many times over. It's a matter of doing all these things in addition to what they were doing before, right? So as long as these other initiatives don't impede on that, not really a problem for me. But they're just trying to build a foundation and a future, and laying out a calculated roadmap that leads to, a company making a lot of money, right? That's what they're aiming to do here. So I think it's more about the management of all these things, right? I mean, we can see that, historically their mobile stuff was like useless. Some of their PC ports are hit or miss. They come out really good, and other times, like The Last of Us, they come out half-baked. It's about straightening that out. The PlayStation production stuff, we're still kind of 50-50 on that. The Last of Us was fantastic, but the Uncharted movie was not that great, right? So there's still so much more that we need to see before we start judging all these new initiatives and core tenets of their business, these growth vectors, right? So, it's a lot of what they've laid out before, but we are going to be seeing a lot of this stuff unfold the next 2 years, right? So it's going to get very interesting as this cycle progresses, but we can say in the here and now, PS5 still doing really well. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below, supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about to you all, and we had 2 videos recently, the PlayStation Showcase reactions and general impressions, and then also we had an extra news story on yesterday that I did as a separate video. Alan Wake 2, a big AAA single-player game, is not going to have a physical disc release, which is rather unusual, so we talk about what that is likely going to mean for this industry. Obviously, I care a lot about that topic, so you can go check that out. But otherwise, this coming Tuesday, I'm not entirely sure if I'll have this project that I'm doing, if it'll be done on time. If not, then I probably just will wait till the next week, so that'll explain why there's no upload, but we'll see. I don't know, but that's pretty much all I've got for you. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.